Career Transitions is sponsored by and produced in cooperation with the Butler University Lacey School of Business graduate programs. For more information, visit butler.edu.
Welcome to another edition of Career Transitions, a podcast that's aimed at giving you all the information as much as we can to get that next job, get a better career, move up in your career, move up in your company, move up in the world of industry that is where you want to be to get that dream job. We thank you for being here today. Once again, joining the program, I'm Eric Birch, along with the executive and career coach to the stars, Jonathan Durden. Jonathan, thanks for being here today.
It's terrific to be here once again.
So today we are talking about some of the things that will help you get that job, will help you move along in your career, things that you need to have in your pocket, in your portfolio, in your hands when and where you are going with your career. Basically, job search documents, things that will help you in your job search, as well as in all of those things that you are involved in the career search, whether it's networking, whether it's interviews, whatever it might be, all of those different tasks or initiatives that you might have. So we have a list, and this is, full disclosure here, this is part one of probably at least two podcasts that will focus on the search documents. We talked about some of these documents before, but never the deep dive that we're going to do today. And so you have a list that maybe we'll run down very quickly, and then we can get into some of the details.
Yes, Eric, thank you. I got a list here for this podcast of 6 documents that I'm recommending everyone, whether you're 20 or 70, and searching for the next dream job, the next bridge job, whatever it is, so that you can be competitive, so that you can vary the competition, so that you can find and actualize landing a dream job. These are 6 of probably 20 new documents that I suggest to all my clients seriously consider drafting. Now, as a quick background, well, before we do that, let me rattle these off. And these are in no particular order. First one is references, and we're going to do a deep dive on each one of these in just a minute. So references, followed by a professional summary or the 90-second elevator speech. Strengths and weaknesses is number 3. Assessments summary is number 4. Career themes, of which we have brought up once or twice, but we're going to do a deeper dive today on that, is the 5th one. And then the last one for today is accomplishments. Now, as I like to do in each one of these podcasts, let me spend just a minute or two giving you some background. It is no longer a successful game plan to come into any interview, to sit down with any good networking contact referral, to start the getting to know you process for any good company, especially one where you think there's a dream job, with just your resume. It is in 2019 and beyond, it is a case where you need to be competitive. And the older and more accomplished you are in the workplace, the competition is going to be stiffer and stiffer. And you need to counter that by communicating to the potential employer that you have done your homework and that you can articulate any and all aspects of your career to date and your aspirations going forward, not from memory, but from well-drafted, well-crafted documents, of which we're going to talk about 6 of them today. So we spent one podcast talking about the resume. We did a deep dive just on that, and that's fine. But we're suggesting that these 6 that we're going to talk about today, and perhaps as many as 10 or 12, maybe as many as 15 more documents that we'll cover in future podcasts, are necessary to put in your portfolio. Eric, shall we spend just a minute talking about the portfolio again for those of our audience who are uncleansed? Eric and I are proponents of a professional portfolio, of which you're going to put all of these new documents in, plus all of the historical documents that somehow, some way, support your career story. And we've spent a whole podcast on the portfolio, so we won't spend more time on it. But I'm suggesting that in addition to putting all the historical documents, in addition to putting your resume in your portfolio, we are suggesting today that you add 6 more documents to it.
I don't think you can stress enough that these are important things to have with you. And at the end of this podcast and the next, when you're feeling this portfolio that you're building grow and grow, and how am I ever going to use any of those things? A quick story, I think, over the last year in terms of some of the things that I have done and putting together a portfolio based on your recommendations and the things that we've talked about here. I have probably my portfolio isn't everything yours has in it, certainly, but it does have.
Size doesn't matter.
Well, in this particular case, it's growing, and it has a really broad spectrum of documents in it. And there is not one single document that I didn't put in there going, I'm never going to need this. And there is not one single document in there that I have not pulled out in an interview or a networking situation over the last year. Every single one of them. So
perfect.
I'm talking about this. We're going to start with references.
So let's talk about references first. References satisfy the need of any good employer to double check all the things that they've heard solely from you, the job candidate. So if you can imagine for a moment, if you don't have references, then an employer is tasked with the objective of making an intelligent decision, sometimes one that will last for years and years, based solely on one source. And that one source is you, the job candidate. References take it to the next step, a logical step. And by the way, references have been around since Methuselah. So we're not talking about anything new here, but we are talking about something that is a basic must-have along with the resume to prove, if you will, if there's such a thing, that everything that you have told the employer and everything that you have shown them in terms of documentation, old and new, is in fact verified. And it's verified by your references. So we're suggesting in today's podcast that you put together a one-page document with your masthead at the top, listing 4 or 5 only references. Now, who can be a reference? Basically anyone who's not a family member. Can we describe it backwards first?
Mhm.
We assume that any family member loves you as a son or a daughter or a husband or wife, whatever. Those don't count. But almost everyone else in your life to date might be an outstanding reference. So let me rattle off some of the obvious. Current or former boss, current or former direct report, current or former colleague in any one of the businesses that you have, as a job candidate, enjoyed. Who else can be a good reference? A rabbi, pastor, or priest. If you've been in the military, a military buddy or your commanding officer can be a good reference. A former faculty member or a current faculty member, or the dean of the school which you received your degree, or even the president of the university, if you had a relationship with her, would be a terrific reference. Also, let's not forget friends, because friends, although they can't necessarily often attest to your working ability, your skills, loyalty, etc., they can attest to your character. They are in some cases the best character reference is a friend that you have had for some time who has known you, we'll say, in multiple settings and has been able to witness courage, character, integrity, and compassion that you might have shown.
I think it could be important too to try and have a mix of different types of people, different people from your life, both professionally and personally, because occasionally a company will ask specifically for I want a professional reference, I want a personal reference, and I want something in between.
Sure.
And so if you have those available, if you've already set that up, then you are prepared for something like that.
Yes, I have many clients, especially those who are a little bit older, we'll say 35 or older, who have had supervisory management experience. They will have 3 classifications on their references, listing a total of 5 people. They'll have bosses as one category, and they might list 1 or 2, current or past. They might have a direct report classification listing 1 or 2 people that they have managed, and they might list a friend again, or a pastor, someone in their life who knows this job candidate well. A couple of other things before we go on to the next one. Put these individuals in the order of importance, because employers, when they're ready to call the references, they will start at the top of your document. So put the person who thinks that you walk on water at the first one. And by the way, lots of my clients have a gross list of 10 or 12 people. And this is one of those few documents that you might get away with having multiple versions of it, depending on who your audience is. For example, if you're going for a leadership position requiring lots of management, you want to have references who know you as a manager. If you're going after a position that's an individual producer, a creative type, then having other people who have witnessed your craft are probably better references. A couple of other things. When you're listing your references, put all the contact information, including typically their business title, address, a work phone, typically their cell, and an email. And then finally, at the end of each one of their names, put a sentence or two describing how you know this person. The reason for that is it's not always obvious to the employer how you know this person. So help them by giving 2 things. What was your relationship with this person, and about how long have you known them? Finally, understand that references like the resume are pretty much must-haves, but bad companies will abuse this document, and they'll abuse it by calling references too soon. When should references be called? References should be called, and by the way, they're typically going to be called instead of written, because the employer has about a half an hour, and they want to spend about 10 minutes with 2 references to confirm that you are the person that you've been telling them. They'll do this at the very end. And in a perfect world, as soon as they have contacted 2 references, they'll turn around and call you, the job candidate, and make you the offer. In other words, by the time they're contacting your references, they've already made the decision that you are the one they want to hire. Bad companies, however, will abuse this document by calling them too soon. They'll call them earlier when they're not even ready to make a decision. One of the things that you can do to help bad companies is at the bottom of this references, put a statement something like the following. Please do not contact these references until you have received specific permission for me to do so. In other words, you're showing them the list, so there's nothing secret about it, but you're cautioning them about calling them too soon. Anything else?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things that I would say. First of all, you need to, I suppose it would go without saying that you're going to pick people for this list of references that you know will say good things about you, but you really need to know that they're going to always say good things about you. And that you may have, you worked at a company and this is a contact of the company. This was your boss, and you may or may not have left with a good, good situation. And if there's anything at all that might cause them to to be, I'll be specific here in a second, it causes them to give something other than a glowing recall of you, then you probably should leave them off the list. And that includes people that, and I have them in my past, and I know people in the past that you have people that will say wonderful things about you, but they have a sense of humor. And their sense of humor is perhaps a little bit off kilter, and they're going to say something that is just not right.
Yes.
And they think everybody understands their humor, but you got to realize these are two people: the person that's calling to get the reference and your reference, who have most likely never spoken to one another before and don't know each other necessarily. And so you have to be very, very concerned about, and you have to think it through when, in your mind, go through the whole scenario. You might even talk to the person. That's what the next point I was going to bring up, but and go through a scenario. But think about it in your head. How is this person going to respond to any of the questions that might be asked about you? And if any of it is something that's slightly off color or not going to be of the most glowing report on your professional relationship, then perhaps you should pass that one by. The other thing is you should never put anybody on your reference list that doesn't know they're on your reference list. It would be disadvantageous to put somebody on here who doesn't know they're going to get a call. And if you have, and you should in most cases, I have many cases, been told, okay, let me have your references. I give them the references with all the information that we just discussed, and then I turn around and contact the person and said, I have just given your name as a reference. And please,
Yes,
do what you can.
Eric makes a good point. So one way to start this process is when you put together, we'll call it your master list, then you might consider sending a quick email to each one of them and say, I would like to use you as a reference. Attached is my resume to remind you who I am, comically, and see what their response is. I have been on the receiving end of many letters that I have turned around and said, thank you, no. And for similar reasons that Eric has just described, the situation that I remember, the person wasn't quite as good as they remember, or lots of other reasons. One of them is I just don't have time. And I almost never like to do that, but there are times in our lives where we're just buried. And when we say yes as a reference, we want to do a good job.
Well, and that's a very, very good point, because you could have people on your list of potential references that would say wonderful things about you. But if that person, and I have one of those, probably 2 or 3, if that person is never available, is never going to be able to take the call from the potential employer, then it serves no purpose.
Yes, and one option in that case, if you do have a good relationship with them, but they just physically don't have the time, and I've offered this, is I'll write a letter of recommendation, or if you're on LinkedIn, which almost everyone is these days, you can do the, is it recommendations, is that what they call it, or endorsements, in lieu of having a reference, and that's fine too, because all good job candidates are going to send employers to those recommendations too. That's a part and parcel of the references anyway, because they're confirmation of good work. And I want to reiterate Eric's point too, that if and when you do hand your reference or send it in after posting a job or responding to a posted job, you owe it to your references to contact them. And typically you can just do it in a quick text or an email, especially if you've already sent them a letter with your resume saying, hey, I just applied to XYZ company and gave you as a reference. Thirdly, if I could interject, if you're going to do this at the highest level of professionalism, when you are far enough along in working with a company and you think that a job offer is imminent, and in many cases you will have a sense that it's coming, I would give your references one more heads up. Say, hey, Fred Smith from Federal Express may be giving you a call because I sense that I'm close to being receiving an offer. That's wonderful, because as I have given 500 references, what that does is, in the old-fashioned world, it allowed me to ruffle through my papers, of which your resume was there, and I would pull it and put it on top, wanting to be extra prepared when that phone call comes, because it comes whenever it comes. There's no planning, there's no scheduling appointments for it. It'll just come, and as a reference, you kind of have to be prepared to say something intelligent for about 10 minutes on this person who has asked you to be the reference.
It makes sense to let them know, for a variety of reasons, let your references know that they might be called, because a lot of them you're giving a cell phone to, and that you have permission to give out. And in this day and age of caller ID, sometimes people just won't pick up if they don't recognize the number, or it's something strange, or it's something that might be misconstrued. So it's always good to give them a heads up for that reason.
And last point, do yourself a favor and send a thank you note to your references if you know, in fact, they gave you a good reference. It doesn't have to be fancy. It can be a simple 1-sentence email that says something like, Joe, thank you very much. I understand the company that I'm about to join reached out to you a couple of weeks ago. Thank you very much.
This podcast is sponsored by and produced in cooperation with the Butler University Lacey School of Business Graduate Programs, a business school on the rise, experiencing tremendous growth in both enrollment and academic quality. The Andre Lacey School of Business at Butler University. It supports the long-term vision to foster further interaction between Butler students and the business community. Check out the growing list of graduate programs available through the Butler University Lacey School of Business by visiting butler.edu.
Let's move on here to the second one you have on your professional summary.
Yes, the number one question you're going to get asked in any kind of a job search setting, whether it's a network, communication meeting, or it's a job interview, is, Fred, tell me a little bit about yourself. Now, most job candidates fail miserably at their response because, first of all, it catches you off guard. And secondly, you fumble madly in something that is elementary, should be elementary, and that is a response to this simple question, tell me a little bit about yourself. And the response is age old. It's what the asker is seeking is about a minute and a half, 2 minutes max. They're not looking for the two typical responses for unprepared job candidates. The first one is the head slapper that says, wow, Jonathan, that's a great question. Where would you like me to start? Okay, if you're not a serious job candidate, if that is your response, and good companies will recognize that you're not a serious job candidate if you fumble that way. The other error that job candidates who aren't prepared with their 90-second elevator speech is they will ramble on literally for 20 minutes, talking about their favorite color, their first love, their last dog's name, things that have nothing to do with the job at hand. So I'm suggesting that you all of our audience, if you want to bury the competition, if you want to impress the employer, and you want to land that dream job, think ahead of time about putting together about a 250-word, one side of one page written document called your professional summary, which is roughly your 90-second response to someone who asks you the most popular question on earth in a job search environment. Tell me a little bit about yourself.
In crafting this, I think it's good to understand that the question, tell me a little bit about yourself, is really shorthand for, and some interviewers and some people in this process will actually say all the words, but most of them do not. They just say, tell me about yourself. And it's really an attempt, and the whole question is, I have your resume in my hand. I have read your resume several times before this interview. Tell me something about yourself that I can't see from reading your resume. And if you don't understand that that's the actual question, and you read your resume to this person who's probably spent, at least if it's a good company and a good interview, has spent at least a few minutes reviewing your resume more than once in this process before you get to that question, then you will have failed by just reading your resume and giving dates and stuff like that. You want to give an overview. You want to find the nuance that is not shown in the words that are on your resume.
Yes, I'm sitting here smiling as Eric is presenting this because I've had so many clients who butcher this badly by either doing the slap their forehead, where do you want me to start? Or we'll talk for 20 minutes, or we'll turn right around and say, well, it's all on my resume, just read my resume. Those are three wrong answers. And good employers will not hire you because you failed to appreciate, as Eric just articulated, some fundamental blocking and tackling of an interview. And by the way, this is also a terrific opening 90 seconds for any networking conversation, because the best network referrals are typically total strangers. Now, they may also have a copy of your resume, but they also don't really know you very well. And often cases, good people ask the question because they want you to articulate verbally at least some of your story in a shortened version, simply so that you can start firing their brain cells to then have a delightful, engaging conversation.
One of the things that we talk about this being the 90-second summary and the elevator pitch. I was recently having a discussion with a talent acquisition professional who asks the question, and this is usually actually in written form, one of the things you do for a pre-interview, but it could conceivably happen in a live interview, is, and it was really an interesting way to get to here without, making sure that they didn't read you just the resume. You've written a book, 10 years from now, you've written a book, give me the back jacket bio, the flat bio. And so that tells you, it's more conversational. It's not just your resume, and it is more conversational, and gives you the opportunity to be a bit creative in this particular realm too. So
yes, and what we're suggesting is that this 250 words roughly, that will amount to about a minute and a half, is broken into three categories. There are three sections. The first one, section background and skill set, and you can actually write this on your document, is highlighting 2 or 3 of your accomplishments and just generally spanning a paragraph or two only, summarizing your career to date. And you might stick in there very quickly if you have any degrees, college degrees, undergraduate or graduate. And that's it. About 100 of those words, 125 of the words, the biggest part is this first section. Section number 2 is very brief. It's the transition section. It's basically a sentence or half a sentence telling the listener why you're talking. Why are you available in this job search? Why are we interviewing? Why are we having a conversation about networking? And so here you say, listen, I'm looking for the next challenge in my life. Or I was, if you want to be specific, you can say, I was just downsized from General Motors 3 weeks ago. Something that will tell the individual that, okay, this person is in a transition somehow. Either they're still working but looking for a new challenge, or they are in fact without a job. The last section then gives you the chance to make a right-hand turn if that's what's happening in your career. It's the what do I want to do next question. often just titled My Career Direction or just moving forward. And here, list a couple sentences describing what you would like to do next. If you don't introduce this third section, then the listener can only assume that what you want to do in the future is exactly what you've done in the past. Well, sometimes that's the case. Often, though, it's not. I just was talking with a new client of mine this afternoon. He has spent 21 years in a nonprofit setting and wants to get back into manufacturing, of which he started his career 55 years old. He's making a major right-hand turn. If you don't state that in your last little 2 or 3 sentences of this 90-second, you will have missed an opportunity to help the listener, either your future boss or a terrific network contact. Anything else on this one?
No, I think that covers a good portion of it. Next thing we were talking about is a list of strengths and weaknesses.
Yes, strengths and weaknesses is going to pop up. I don't like it as a particular interview question, but it's one of the most popular, third or fourth most popular question. So be ready for it. Don't do like the vast majority of job candidates, old and young. Slap your forehead and say, gee, Jonathan, that's a great question. Let me think about it, or let me get back to you. Those 2 responses indicate that you are not an all-star job candidate. And if you're talking to a good employer, you will get a black mark on your your evaluation right off the bat. So here's what we're suggesting. One side of one piece of paper, again, write these down. Put your masthead at the top, list 3 strengths and 1 weakness. By the way, we all have scores and scores of strengths, and we all have scores and scores of weaknesses. We're not interested in you rattling off 30 or 40 of each. That's not what the question asks. The question asks, can you share 1 or 2 or 3 strengths and any weaknesses that you can think of? So 3 strengths, 1 weakness. In each strength, list 2 things. Briefly describe what that strength is, first of all. And then secondly, share a brief story, an example of how you have demonstrated that strength. Do that for each one of your 3 strengths. When you get to the weakness, describe the weakness. And underneath the weakness, put a brief illustration, an example in your past of how that weakness has popped up and how you are at least working on overcoming it. Okay?
Very important, the weakness part of it, I think, because there has been a tendency. I'm not sure I've ever said it had it come out of my mouth, but certainly I think that I have heard it when I have been interviewing people. I said, "Give me your strengths and weaknesses," and you say, "I have no weaknesses." First of all, that says 2 things.
I'm not hiring you if you say you have no weaknesses, because I know everyone has weaknesses.
You are not self-aware enough for me to hire. If you don't think you have a weakness here or there, or something certainly that you can work on, I can give you. I was talking to the COO of a company, and we got into that conversation. What I didn't know, here's something to remember too, depends on how it happens and whether you're in an interview or whether it's an internal, especially if it's an internal hire or internal promotion or something you're dealing with, is it'll be tricky. They'll ask you, so tell me what you feel your weaknesses might be. Tell me a little bit about, how you feel about others. The way they do this is they say, tell me how you think your coworkers perceive you. Because your coworkers, of course, will know what your strengths and weaknesses might be if you're in that particular type of position. Ask that question, and if you do not answer honestly, with both strengths and weaknesses, that's when you will find out that COO had talked to your peers and asked that question and already had an answer and is looking not necessarily to put a pin in a weakness, but rather determine your self-awareness. And that is important. If you're aware of it and like you say, put how you're working through it or dealing with it. Right there, you have the answer, you have the question and the answer in a way that is going to answer the unspoken question.
Yes, for those of our audience who are struggling with how you put together a weakness explanation, here's a model. My weakness is I used to be a poor dancer. And the explanation is 3 years ago, I've always known that I'm a poor dancer, but 3 years ago, it became a requirement of my job. And it was blatantly obvious to me and everyone else that I was weak at dancing. So I started taking classes. And I got better and better and better. And last year, I won a dancing contest. So the rhythm for these weaknesses is, first of all, recognition. Secondly, doing something about it to try to improve it. And then thirdly, acknowledging that you're better than you were when you first recognized it, somehow. Okay, that's a model that you can use for almost every weakness. In fact, some people think that a weakness is nothing more than a strength used in excess. So if some of you are concerned again about coming up with a weakness, think of you're a gregarious person. You like to talk a lot. Sometimes those kinds of people get in trouble because they talk too much.
But you also could go too far on that and say, well, I'm just too good of a golfer, and that's just not going to work.
No. So this is the time to be humble and to recognize, as Eric articulated a few minutes ago, that you do have weaknesses and that you've thought about it, and you can articulate simply one of them.
Okay, so let's move on to the assessments summary.
Yes, again, for those of you of our audience who haven't participated in too many of the previous podcasts we've done, Eric and I are proponents of assessments. And assessments are any way that you can evaluate yourself as a professional. And they run all over the gambit from personality like MBTI to DISC, to
Clifton Strengths, all of them.
strengths and weaknesses, career interests, entrepreneurial aptitude, on and on and on. We recommend that you take as many of these assessments as you can, perhaps as many as 6 or 8 or 10. Again, assessments are available online these days, almost all of them. They're usually pretty inexpensive. And the beauty of it, once you've finished the assessment, the vast majority of the good ones produce a report. Okay, here's what we're suggesting that you do now as this document number 4 in our talk today on this podcast. Take each one of these reports following completion of the assessment, read through it, and first of all, verify that it in fact is reasonably accurate to what you think independently of yourself. And if it is, print that report off and put it in your portfolio. And then on top of that report, fire up Word and put together in your own words 3 or 4 sentences only of what the results of that assessment means to you and means to you in the workplace. So that you have not only, some cases that's a 21-page report or more, you have synthesized, summarized that in your own words in 3 or 4 sentences, print that off, put that on top, and put one of those on top of each one of the assessments that you have completed. Then, when you have completed more than one of these, fire up Word one last time and put your masthead at the top on a document and put together 2 or 3 paragraphs on a report that summarizes all of these assessments in your own words as to how that applies to you and the workforce, you in the workplace. And then put that document in the front of all of your assessments in your portfolio.
So this is something that I think, and when you're doing it in your own words, you might want to refer to what you were doing or where you got this assessment, where the assessment came, and make some kind of reference to it at least. I have copies of the reports, the full reports in my portfolio. Good to have those as well, but of course the summary is going to be advantageous, especially when you've done it 6, 7, 8, or 9 times.
Yes, and the purpose of this is not to show anyone. The purpose is to help you in a conversation if and when assessments come up. Because you don't want to, you might want to show or show yourself or show someone else some of the reports, but you don't want to talk about the reports, the verbiage that they use. You want to talk about it in your own terms. So that's why we're suggesting these individual summaries, very brief, in the front of each one.
Next one is career themes, and this goes by a couple of different names based on some of the people that I've talked to, but a career theme is common threads from your career that you're going to write down in some fashion.
Yes, as we have talked before, if this is a good company full of good people, and it's anywhere close to what you consider your dream job, you may very well be there a long time because it's more fun than a barrel of monkeys. And if you're going to be there a long time, you're going to be promoted well beyond the job description in front of you. And so I'm suggesting that soon in the interview process, even the first interview, if it's apparent to you then that this is a good opportunity, I want you to consider launching into your career themes that you've already prepared and thought about. Because this will excite good people in good organizations, because good people in good organizations want to hire people who are promotable. They want to hire people who have skills, interests, and ambitions beyond the job at hand. And as I've suggested in one of the previous podcasts, you might very well end up spending half of your time in the total interview process talking about your career themes beyond the duties and responsibilities of the job at hand. So how do you come up with these career themes? Well, lots of different ways. Certainly, once you've started putting your portfolio together, certainly once you've started completing a couple of these assessments, certainly after you started talking with family and friends and this growing network who are going to give you wonderful feedback, you're going to start to be clear about common things that have happened to you that have been enjoyable, and things that you've accomplished well in your career today. Even if you're 25 years old, you'll probably already have some common themes. And what could those common themes be? Let me rattle off a few of them. Good writing skills, teamwork. You speak well before a large group. You're great at project management. You have natural and budding leadership skills. You're good at managing people. You have built a lot of trust. You have artistic capability. You love and enjoy and are fairly accomplished at a brainstorming session. You're pretty creative. You love process flow and solving problems in a complicated process. You're a continuous improvement phenom. You love to improve existing designs. You love crafting instruction manuals. You have a sixth sense about the customer and building strong relationships, and possibly hundreds of others. These things will pop up frequently in your career, even if it's a young career, let alone if you're in your 50s and 60s. Write these down. And I suggest, this is again a one side of one page document with your masthead at the top, list only 4 or 5 and briefly describe it, and then give an example under each one of how this theme has been a common thread 2 or 3 or 4 times perhaps in your career today. and then put that in your portfolio, bring it to every networking conversation and every interview.
It also has the opportunity to explain sometimes when you've had a divergent career that has taken different courses, and or at least on paper it looks like, okay, you're doing this, and then you're doing that, and then you're doing this, but there is a consistent theme, and that way you can point it out and be ready to answer that question should it come up.
Yeah, Eric's referring to transferable skills. So you've been a good people manager, for example, but under many settings,
Right.
Under very different settings, and this gives you an opportunity to thread those together and call it a theme.
So let's move on here because we're running to the end of our program, and the final one for this program is accomplishments. And what do we mean by accomplishments?
Yes, this is a document that I recommend for our audience who's perhaps a little bit more senior. And here's the backdrop. In a typical resume, you're going to have room in a 2-page resume. That's what we recommend for 6 or 8, 10, maybe 12 maximum accomplishments, and to do them in the PARS format. But if you have been in the workforce and you've been an aggressive hard charger, even as young as 30, but certainly if you are 40 and beyond, you probably have now, if you thought about it and started writing them down, 20 or 30 or 40 accomplishments. They might be all over the place, but you've got that many. And practically speaking, then you have a master list, and you cull from that then the top 10 or 8 or 10, 12 that you put in your resume. Well, but you don't want to delete those. They're good. They'll be great conversation pieces in a good job interview. So create a second document beyond your resume called accomplishments. List all these accomplishments in reverse chronological order only on your resume with your job description in the company, and put numbers on them now instead of dashes that might appear on your resume, so that they're easier to refer to. And keep this list as your unabridged master. And then when you do want to update your resume from time to time, you have all of your accomplishments here. Label this document again with your master at the top, accomplishments. Print it off. Some cases it might be 4, 5, 6 pages long. Again, if you're over 40, put this in your portfolio and bring this document with you to every interview.
It's something that can grow over time, change, be different, and could be conceivably something that may not come up in 2, 3, 4 interviews, but then somewhere along the line. And then also, if you're looking and kind of foreshadowing some of the other things that we're doing, when you do this, go through this exercise, and see your accomplishments all in one place, maybe you see a theme, or maybe this gives you the idea that the confidence builder that you to remind yourself of all the things that you have accomplished, and especially when you're in the 5th, 6th, 7th, 100th interview for your next move, and it will remind you of why you're where you are and how you got there, and perhaps be that little piece of memory that sustains you and brings you back to where you should be when you're contemplating the discussion about your future.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else about this group here? The 6 things that we talked about: the accomplishments, career themes, assessment summary, strengths and weaknesses, professional summary, and references.
Eric and I want our audience to do one thing. We want you to win. Winning is not easy. Winning takes hard work. It takes time. It takes preparation. In these 6 documents, we're suggesting that you add to the traditional resume by knocking the socks off the employer such that you win the next dream job.
If you have any questions or suggestions for this particular podcast or any podcast in the future, we invite you to contact us through our email address, which is careertransitionspodcast@gmail.com. That's careertransitionspodcast@gmail.com. Thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you, Jonathan, for another great show.
Thank you for inviting me once again.
Career Transitions is sponsored by and produced in cooperation with the Butler University Lacey School of Business graduate programs. For more information, visit